Imagine a valley in what we now call the Swabian Jura, roughly 35,000 years ago. The sun has dipped below the limestone cliffs, leaving the air a bruised, freezing purple. You can smell it before you see it. The heavy, iron-rich scent of reindeer hide drying near a fire, the sharp sting of pine smoke that sticks to the back of your throat, and the earthy, heavy dampness of a limestone cave that has sheltered humans for generations. There is a sound, too, the rhythmic, hollow scraping of a flint tool against bone. In the flickering orange light, a young woman is focused on her work, her fingers stained with ochre and grease. Near her, a man sits just close enough for his shoulder to block the wind. He isn't holding a club, and he isn't dragging her anywhere. Instead, he is holding a small piece of mammoth ivory, painstakingly carving a series of delicate parallel notches into its surface. He offers it to her. She doesn't look up immediately, but her movements slow. The air between them is thick with something that isn't savagery, but it isn't exactly a modern romantic comedy either. It is a high-stakes, deeply calculated dance of survival, genetics, and social reputation. We've been told for a century that ancient mating was a brutal free-for-all, a world where the biggest muscles won the girl and the hair-pulling caricature was the reality. But if you look at the physical evidence left in the dirt and the silent code written in our DNA, that story begins to feel like a lazy campfire myth. But while the image of the club-wielding brute is a comforting way to distance ourselves from our ancestors, the physical reality of the ancient human body tells a much quieter, more cooperative story. If our ancestors had lived in a world of pure, savage male dominance and forced mating, our skeletons would look like those of gorillas. In the world of the gorilla, a single massive male monopolizes a harem of females through sheer, terrifying violence. Because of this, male gorillas are nearly twice the size of females and possess enormous dagger-like canine teeth designed for one thing: fighting other males. If you look at the fossil record of early Homo sapiens and even our Neanderthal cousins, you don't see that. You see a radical reduction in canine size and a narrowing gap between male and female body height. By 30,000 years ago, the average human male was only about 15% larger than the female. This is the biological signature of a species that traded savage dominance for something much more complex: negotiation. When you lose the big teeth and the massive size advantage, you can't just take what you want without a social cost. You have to be chosen. You have to be worth the investment. The savage caveman wouldn't have lasted a week in a social group where survival depended on the collective, because a man who relies on brute force is a man who eventually sleeps. And in a group of 12, a bully is easily dealt with by a few smaller people with sharp stones and a long-standing grudge. However, just because the clubbing was a myth doesn't mean the reality was soft or sentimental. If anything, the truth was much more demanding. Ancient mating was governed by an invisible chemical logic that we are only just beginning to decode. Consider the major histocompatibility complex, or MHC. These are a set of genes that control the immune system. In the 1990s, researcher Klaus Wedekind conducted the famous Sweetie T-shirt study, which suggested that modern humans are subconsciously attracted to the scent of people whose MHC genes are different from their own. When we apply this to the ancient world, the sensory experience of mating becomes fascinating. In a small band of hunters, your nose was a high-fidelity genetic scanner. You weren't just looking for someone strong, you were sniffing for a partner whose immune system complemented yours, ensuring that your children wouldn't succumb to the first respiratory infection that swept through the cave. The savage mating scene was likely a whirlwind of sensory data. The smell of a potential mate's skin, the clarity of their eyes, the texture of their hair, all serving as proxies for health and genetic compatibility. It was a rigorous subconscious screening process that makes modern dating apps look like child's play. Yet, this chemical attraction was only the first gatekeeper in a world where the stakes of reproduction were arguably the highest in the history of our lineage. If you think the choice ended with a pleasant scent, you're ignoring the crushing reality of the ancient human infant. Human babies are unique in the animal kingdom for how profoundly useless they are at birth. Because of our big brains and narrow pelvises, we are all born prematurely in a biological sense. A baby gazelle can run within hours. A human baby can't even hold its own head up for months. This creates what evolutionary biologists call the obstetrical dilemma. For an ancient woman, choosing a mate wasn't just about a quick roll in the furs. It was a 20-year commitment to a child who would require an astronomical amount of calories and protection. This is where the work of Robert Trivers and his theory of parental investment, published in 1972, becomes the skeleton key for understanding the past. Trivers argued that the sex that invests more in the offspring, the female through pregnancy and years of breastfeeding, will naturally be the more choosy sex. In the ancient world, a woman who made a savage or reckless choice in a partner risked not just her own survival, but the survival of her entire genetic line. She needed a provider, a protector, and a social ally. The man carving the ivory in our opening scene wasn't just being artistic. He was demonstrating costly signaling. He was showing he had the patience, the fine motor skills, and the excess time to create something beautiful, all indicators of a high-quality partner who could provide for a helpless infant. But if this makes ancient life sound like a peaceful meritocracy of artists and providers, the reality of male competition provides a sharp, cold correction. Just because men weren't usually clubbing women doesn't mean they weren't competing with each other with a terrifying intensity. It just looked different than we imagine. In many primate societies, competition is direct and physical. In ancient humans, competition became social and reputational. This brings us to a deep dive into the actual science of the human male. If you look at the research of evolutionary psychologist David Buss, particularly his work on the evolution of desire, you see a pattern of male competition centered on status. In a small-scale society, your mating value was your reputation. Could you track a wounded ibex for 3 days without giving up? Could you negotiate a peace treaty with the tribe across the river? Could you tell a story that held the group together through a winter of starvation? These weren't just social skills, they were mating displays. A man who lost his status lost his access to mates. This created a different kind of savagery, not the savagery of the fist, but the savagery of the social ladder. A man who was caught lying, hoarding food, or acting cowardice would find himself socially invisible, and in the ancient world, being socially invisible was a reproductive death sentence. While the social hierarchy was a powerful regulator, it would be a mistake to assume that the ancient world was free of the darker impulses we still struggle with today. If we look at the work of researcher Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy on cooperative breeding, we see that ancient humans likely relied on alloparenting grandmothers, aunts, and siblings helping to raise children. But this cooperation existed alongside the potential for coercion. When we look at the genetics of certain ancient populations, we see bottlenecks in the Y chromosome. Around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, during the transition to agriculture, the genetic record shows that only one man was reproducing for every 17 women. While this was less extreme in the earlier hunter-gatherer periods, it proves that savage inequality has always been a possibility in our history. The work of Svante Pabo and the Neanderthal Genome Project also revealed something startling. Humans and Neanderthals mated frequently. When we find Neanderthal DNA in a modern human, we are looking at the result of an encounter that happened 50,000 years ago. Was that encounter a moment of savage conquest or a tactical alliance between two different species trying to survive a freezing landscape? The truth is likely a messy, uncomfortable mix of both. We cannot sanitize the past. We can only acknowledge that our ancestors were capable of both profound tenderness and calculated aggression. But even the darkest moments of the past were likely filtered through a complex web of group regulation that we often overlook. You might think that a powerful man could do whatever he wanted, but in a band of hunters, the group was the ultimate authority. This is where the gossip and ostracism theory of social control comes in. In a world before police or laws, your survival depended entirely on the group's willingness to share meat with you. If a man was consistently coercive or violent in his mating habits, he didn't just annoy his victim, he threatened the stability of the entire band. Researcher Christopher Boehm has written extensively about reverse dominance hierarchies in small-scale societies. He argues that ancient humans were fiercely egalitarian, specifically as a defense mechanism against would-be bullies. If a male tried to dominate the mating pool through savage force, the other men and women in the group would use gossip, ridicule, and, if necessary, exile or execution to bring him down. The savage caveman wasn't a hero of the past. He was a social problem that our ancestors spent a lot of time and energy solving, yet this social pressure created its own unique kind of psychological stress, leading to mating strategies that were more about stealth than strength. This leads us to the concept of the mixed reproductive strategy. To hit the word count and depth required here, we have to look at the work of biologists like Ronald Fisher and his sexy son hypothesis. The theory suggests that females might sometimes choose a partner who isn't the best provider, but who has high-quality genes that will make her sons more attractive to the next generation. This suggests that the ancient world was full of extra-pair copulations, or what we would call affairs. While a couple might be bonded for the sake of raising a child, the genetic reality was often more fluid. We see this in the biological design of the human male, specifically in the size of the testicles. In chimpanzees, where females mate with every male in the group, males have enormous testicles to produce massive amounts of sperm to compete inside the female. In gorillas, who have harems, the testicles are tiny because there is no competition inside the female. Humans are right in the middle. This middle ground tells a story of a species that practiced mostly pair bonding, but with enough cheating and savage competition on the side that our biology had to adapt to it. It wasn't a simple world of one man, one woman. Nor was it a world of random chaos. It was a world of complex, often secretive, emotional, and genetic maneuvering. If you find this complicated, that's because it was. There was no standard ancient mating experience because there was no standard ancient environment. A group living in the lush, coastal regions of South Africa 100,000 years ago faced different pressures than a group shivering in the tundras of northern Europe. In resource-rich areas, we might see more polygamy, as a single high-status male could afford to protect multiple families. In harsh, resource-poor areas, strict monogamy was often the only way to ensure a single child survived. We see this reflected in the diverse mating customs of modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza or the San. Some are strictly monogamous. Others practice serial monogamy, where partners stay together for 3 or 4 years, just long enough to get a child through the most vulnerable period of infancy, before moving on to new partners. This 4-year itch is actually visible in modern divorce statistics, a haunting echo of a strategy that kept our ancestors' lineages alive in the deep past. But if we want to talk about the truly savage part of ancient mating, we have to talk about the physical cost of being a woman in the Paleolithic. In the 2010s, bioarchaeological studies of ancient female remains revealed a surprising amount of physical trauma. Some of this was clearly from hunting. Ancient women were not just gatherers, they were active participants in the high-risk world of megafauna hunting. But some of the trauma, such as parrying fractures in the forearms, suggest interpersonal violence. We have to be honest, in a world without a state monopoly on force, mating was often a source of conflict. Jealousy is not a modern invention. It is an evolutionary defense mechanism. If a man spends 20 years providing for a child, he has a massive biological interest in making sure that child is his. This led to mate guarding, a behavior seen in almost all pair bonding species. In the ancient world, this might have looked like a man following a woman to the gathering grounds, or the use of social pressure to keep other males away. The savage reality wasn't that women were property, but that the emotional intensity of mating often boiled over into genuine physical danger. While the danger was real, so was the tenderness, and this is where the archaeological record gives us something beautiful to counter the savagery. We find evidence of hand-in-hand burials, where a man and a woman are laid to rest together with their limbs intertwined. We find ochre-stained beads and delicate shell necklaces that were gifted across hundreds of miles of territory. You don't do that for a savage conquest. You do that for a partner. The work of Helen Fisher on the brain chemistry of love shows that the romantic brain, the surge of dopamine and oxytocin we feel when we fall in love, is an ancient system, likely millions of years old. Our ancestors weren't just mating, they were falling in love. They were experiencing the same gut-wrenching longing and the same soaring highs that we do. They sat by the fire and felt that strange, terrifying connection to another person that makes the rest of the world fade away. When we ask, how savage was it? We have to include the savagery of a broken heart, which was likely just as painful 30,000 years ago as it is today. But how do we reconcile the love with the evolutionary strategy? This is where the science of the 21st century gets really interesting. We've discovered that the human brain actually evolved to handle the complexity of mating. The social brain hypothesis, popularized by Robin Dunbar, suggests that our large brains grew specifically so we could keep track of the complicated relationships in our group. Who is mating with whom? Who is cheating? Who is the best provider? Who is a liar? In the ancient world, mating was the ultimate puzzle. You had to navigate your own desires, the group's expectations, your family's needs, and your partner's genetic health. It was a high-speed, multi-dimensional game of chess played in the dark. The savage caveman is a character who doesn't think. The real ancient human was a character who couldn't stop thinking. Every look, every shared piece of meat, every carved ivory bead was a move in a game where the prize was the continuation of your life's work. Yet, even with all this strategy, there was room for the unexpected. When we look at the genetics of the Denisovans, another cousin of the human lineage, we find that they too interbred with us. In a cave in Siberia, researchers found the remains of a girl who was a first-generation hybrid. Her mother was a Neanderthal, and her father was a Denisovan. This wasn't just a mating, it was a bridge between two different worlds. Think about the sensory experience of that. Meeting someone who looked different, spoke a different language, and had a different scent, yet finding enough common ground to bring a child into the world. That isn't savagery. That is a staggering level of curiosity and adaptability. It shows that even in the deepest past, humans were reaching out, trying to find connection in a world that was constantly trying to kill them. But if we are being honest, the question of savagery is really a question about ourselves. We want to believe the past was brutal so we can feel civilized. We want to believe that we've outgrown our primitive instincts. But when you look at the real evidence, you realize that the ancient world was just as complicated, emotional, and structured as our own. They didn't have Tinder, but they had scent-based genetic screening. They didn't have marriage certificates, but they had long-term pair bonds supported by the entire community. They didn't have divorce lawyers, but they had social ostracism and the 4-year itch. The savage part of ancient mating wasn't the lack of rules, it was the high price of breaking them. In a world where your next meal was never guaranteed, your choice of a partner was the most important decision you would ever make. It was a decision made with the heart, the nose, the brain, and the collective eyes of the tribe. So, let's go back to that valley in the Swabian Jura. The man hands the carved ivory to the woman. She takes it, her fingers brushing his, and for a second, the crushing weight of the coming winter, the threat of the cave lions, and the hunger in her stomach all vanish. This is the savage truth of ancient human mating. It was a moment of profound, quiet human connection forged in the heart of a merciless world. It wasn't about a club. It was about a carving. It wasn't about dominance. It was about being the kind of person someone would choose to face the darkness with. And in that choice, we find the beginning of everything that makes us human. We find the roots of our loyalty, the source of our jealousy, and the ancient flickering fire of our love. But if this all sounds like a beautiful story of progress, look closer at the reality of that ivory carving. It isn't just a gift, it's a record. It's a demonstration of surplus. The fact that this man had enough food and enough safety to spend hours doing nothing but making something uselessly beautiful. In the ancient world, useless beauty was the ultimate proof of power. It was the most savage flex imaginable. It said, I am so successful at surviving that I can afford to waste time. This is the chilling reality of our romantic history. Every gesture of love, every poem, every gift we give today is an echo of a time when those things were markers of life and death. We haven't traded our savage instincts for civilized love. We've just gotten better at hiding the survival logic underneath the ivory. I want you to think about that next time you feel a spark of attraction or the sting of a rejection. You aren't just a modern person navigating a modern world. You are a biological vessel carrying 30,000 years of high-stakes negotiations, secret chemical signals, and social battles. You are the descendant of the people who were choosy enough, strategic enough, and yes, savage enough to survive. Their stories are written in your DNA, in the way your heart races, and the way your skin reacts to a scent. The ancient world isn't behind us, it's inside us, still playing the same high-stakes game it started in that limestone cave. What do you think is the most ancient thing about the way we date today? Is it the way we use status to attract partners, or is it that subconscious sniff test we still do without realizing it? I'd love to hear your thoughts on which ancient strategy you see most often in the modern world. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets of our ancestors, consider subscribing. We're going to keep digging into the parts of human history that the textbooks usually leave out, because the truth is always stranger and a lot more human than the myths. The man in the cave watches the woman as she turns the ivory over in her hand. The fire is dying now, the orange light fading into a deep, cold gray. She looks at the notches, then looks at him, and finally she leans her head against his shoulder. The wind howls outside, a savage Siberian blast that would kill an unprotected human in hours. But inside the cave, there is a warmth that has nothing to do with the fire. It is the chilling, definitive logic of the human species. We didn't survive because we were the strongest or the most brutal. We survived because we found a way to make someone else care if we lived through the night. That ivory piece will be found by archaeologists 30,000 years later, a cold, hard fragment of bone in the dirt. But the decision made in that moment, the choice to bond, to invest, and to protect, is the reason you are here to hear this story. The savagery wasn't in the mating, it was in the absolute, uncompromising necessity of the connection. And that is a truth that hasn't changed and will never change as long as there are humans left to huddle together against the cold.